thank Bob Luongo, who's Director of Planning and Development, and Mayor Robert Hedlund for inviting me to say a few words on behalf of the Emery family. As a family, we were privileged to occupy this site from 1916 until 2011, some 95 years. As Mayor Hedlund pointed out, some of the grandchildren, and at least one of the great-grandchildren, are here to enjoy this dedication. It was purchased from a family known as the Binions, who had occupied the space from sometime in the early 1900s, 1903, 05, somewhere in there, to 1916, when my grandfather purchased it just before World War I. As a family, we are very pleased that the city of Weymouth, I have since learned more properly called the town of Weymouth, has chosen to preserve this site for the benefit and pleasure of all of its citizens. Speaking of the house, I should mention that the Binions built the house in the style of George Washington's Mount Vernon after spending a large number of months, I'm not exactly sure, touring Europe and going all the way around the Mediterranean in about 1902 or 1903, and settled at the end on a replica of sorts of Mount Vernon, George Washington's house. At the time it was built, I have been told it was the only such replica of the house that is north of the Mason-Dixon line. The hill, known for centuries as King Oak Hill by virtue of its magnificent view of Boston and its harbor to the north, which you cannot see that way, or South Weymouth to the south, or the Blue Hills here to the west, or even the Atlantic Ocean to the east, has been around a lot longer even than the town of Weymouth, despite its being here for 383 years. Because of its height and because of its commanding view of the entire harbor, as a lad I was told that in 1768, a Weymouth farmer working the field at the top noticed ships of the British fleet entering the outer harbor, having come to occupy the rebellious city of Boston. That Weymouth farmer mounted his horse, rode it to Braintree, where he alerted the people there, now called Quincy, but Braintree back then. They sent a rider on into the city, and it was because of that that many of the rebels were able to leave the city prior to the arrival of the troops themselves. Almost 2 centuries later, during World War II, that small playhouse just over the rise there was actually used as a bunkhouse for troops who were manning anti-aircraft placement up here on the field behind me in defense primarily of the Quincy shipyard. As a very young lad, I myself recall the occasional glimpse that would pass over the Fore River and head for South Weymouth and the very large blimp hangars located there at the naval station. I might add that when I was a lot younger than I am today, the view was a lot more spectacular from this level. It's still really spectacular from the cupola, as the little invitation, if you saw it, will show, which shows the entire Boston harbor. In the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, hundreds of Weymouth and Braintree and Hingham and Quincy teenagers climbed up the steep and narrow staircase to that cupola. As many of you will know, my parents, Marion and Allan Emery Jr., hosted what was known as Bible Club in the living room of this house. In the late 40s, my folks had started a Thursday evening study for some kids, teenagers in their church locally there, to learn just a bit more about the Bible than they could in Sunday school hour. These high school students wanted to study more about the Bible, and they started inviting their friends from churches all over Braintree and even into Weymouth. Within a year or so, our home in Braintree could not take care of them, so my grandparents invited my parents to have that meeting in their home here. Excuse me. My grandparents died in 1952, in 1963, and 1964. My dad and mom moved into this house. I was already in college, so I'm one of the few people here who, of the Emery clan who actually never lived here except for one summer, in the summer of 1964. But during that period of time, probably close to 700 or 800, maybe as many as 1,000, nobody ever kept count, of teenagers would meet Thursday evenings in this house. My folks pretty much gave them the free range of the house, and so almost all of them found their way to the cupola, because the view up there is spectacular. During the longer days of summer, when the club disbanded for much of the summer months, they would come up here on Saturdays sometimes and play baseball on the lawn right out here in front, which is really tough if you happen to be downhill of the fielder, because they've really evened this out a lot more than it used to be. It used to run off the edge. Anyway, it is this land and this old house that hold many memories for me as a grandchild and then later as a son of an owner, for many in our extended family, for many in this town, particularly of Weymouth. And as a family, we trust that as this land returns to the care of its citizen owners, it will be a source of joy and peace and satisfaction now and for centuries to come.